The emergency signal cut through the darkness of space like a knife. It traveled across star systems, bouncing off relay stations and communication satellites, searching desperately for someone who would listen. The message was simple but filled with terror. The Galactic Council was dying and they needed help from anyone who would answer. Ambassador Velth stood in the council chamber, his pale blue skin glistening with the sweat of fear. Around him, representatives from dozens of species argued and panicked. The holographic display showed the same horrifying image that had haunted their nightmares for months. The Krythak swarm was coming and nothing could stop them. The swarm was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were not a civilization or an empire. They were a plague. Massive creatures with hard shells and too many legs moved across worlds like locusts. They consumed everything in their path. Worse, they could infect other species, turning peaceful beings into mindless soldiers for their hive mind. 3 council worlds had already fallen. 7 more were under attack. Velth had watched the military reports with growing despair. The council's fleets were among the best in the galaxy. Their weapons were sophisticated, and their tactics refined over thousands of years of peaceful expansion. But none of it mattered against the swarm. For every ship they destroyed, 10 more appeared. For every creature they killed, 100 more crawled over the corpses to attack. Now, as the chamber echoed with desperate voices, Velth made a decision that many would call madness. He accessed the restricted archives and pulled up coordinates that had been locked away for 300 years. The quarantine zone, the forbidden sector where humanity lived. Most species tried to forget about humans. First contact had been a disaster. When the Council's exploration ships had found Earth, they were excited to meet a new species. That excitement died quickly when they saw what humans actually were. They came from a deathworld, a planet so violent and hostile that it should not have produced intelligent life at all. Earth's gravity was twice what most species considered normal. Its atmosphere was rich with oxygen, a highly reactive gas that most civilizations used carefully in controlled environments. The planet had extreme temperature variations, active volcanoes, devastating storms, and predators that would be considered nightmares on any civilized world. And humans had evolved at the top of that food chain. The Council had been horrified. Humans were dense with muscle. Their bodies could heal from injuries that would kill other species. They could run for hours without stopping, function on minimal sleep, and digest foods that were toxic to most galactic citizens. Their eyes faced forward like predators. Their teeth included sharp canines designed for tearing meat. Even their entertainment showed a disturbing fascination with violence and survival. The Council had made the decision to quarantine humanity. They were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much like the monsters from ancient legends. Humanity was banned from galactic society and locked behind a barrier of warning satellites and military checkpoints. For 3 centuries, humans had remained isolated, and the galaxy had pretended they did not exist. Now Velth was about to break that isolation. His manipulator appendages trembled as he composed the message. He knew many council members would call this treason. But what choice did they have? The swarm was coming, and soon there would be nothing left to save. The message was transmitted into the quarantine zone. Then came the waiting. Thousands of light years away. Commander Jack Hayes sat in the command chair of the Valkyrie, watching the stars drift past the view screen. The ship was one of humanity's finest, a testament to what humans had built in their isolation. It was not elegant like council vessels. It was angular and heavily armored, built to take damage and keep fighting. Jack was reviewing supply reports when the communication officer called out. An unknown signal had just entered their space, and it was using old council encryption codes. Jack sat up straight. The council had not contacted humanity in 300 years. The message played across the bridge. Ambassador Velth's voice, translated by the ship's computer, filled the room with desperation. The Galactic Council was facing extinction. They needed help. They were begging humanity to answer. The bridge went silent. Jack looked at his crew and saw the same mixture of emotions on every face. Anger at the Council for abandoning them. Satisfaction at seeing the proud aliens brought low, but also something else. Compassion. Humans knew what it felt like to face extinction. They had nearly destroyed themselves several times before reaching the stars. Jack forwarded the message to Earth Command and Admiral Linda Morgan. Within hours, a response came back. There would be a debate. The government was divided. Some wanted revenge on the Council for the centuries of isolation. Others wanted to prove that humanity was better than the monsters the aliens feared. Captain Amy Fletcher arrived at the Valkyrie from Earth on a fast courier ship. She was a diplomatic officer, one of the few humans who still believed in eventually rejoining galactic society. She argued passionately before the military council and the civilian government. This was humanity's chance. If they helped save the council, the quarantine would end. Humanity could finally take its place among the stars. Admiral Morgan made the final decision. Humanity would answer the call. Not because they owed the council anything, but because it was the right thing to do. Because humans, despite everything, still believed in helping others who faced impossible odds. The orders went out across the human fleet. Every available warship was to prepare for immediate deployment. Crews were recalled from leave. Weapons were loaded. Engines were fired up. The fleet that had defended Earth and its colonies for 3 centuries was about to leave the quarantine zone for the first time. Jack stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie as the fleet assembled. Dozens of ships hung in space around him, each one representing humanity's determination to survive. They were not the most advanced ships in the galaxy. Human technology had developed in isolation, following different paths than Council science. But they were tough, reliable, and crewed by people who refused to give up. The fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives and jumped toward Council space. Behind them, Earth watched and waited. Ahead of them, a galaxy at war desperately needed the help of the monsters they had locked away. Humanity was coming, and nothing would be the same again. The space around Council Station Theta rippled and tore as the human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel. One by one, the ships appeared, their angular hulls reflecting the light of nearby stars. They looked nothing like Council vessels with their smooth curves and artistic designs. These ships were built for war, covered in armor plating and bristling with weapons that seemed crude but undeniably lethal. Ambassador Velth watched the fleet's arrival from the station's observation deck. His hearts were beating too fast, and he could feel the fear spreading through his body like ice water. He had called for help, but now that it had arrived, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The humans were here, and there would be no sending them back. The Valkyrie took position near the station, and a shuttle detached from its hull. Velth gathered the council representatives in the main docking bay. Security forces stood ready, though everyone knew they would be useless if the humans decided to attack. The species present included Ethrin like Velth, the insectoid Clixon, the aquatic Nereids, and several others. All of them had voted to quarantine humanity centuries ago. Now they waited to meet the monsters face to face. The shuttle airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. First Officer Danny Cole stepped through, followed by 6 members of his security team. The council representatives gasped and stepped back. The humans were bigger than expected, their bodies thick with muscle that showed even through their uniforms. They moved with a predator's grace, their forward-facing eyes scanning the room with unnerving focus. Danny was not trying to be intimidating, but he could see the fear in the aliens' eyes. He had read the reports about how other species viewed humans. He knew they looked like monsters to these peaceful civilizations. He stopped a respectful distance away and spoke in careful, measured tones that the translation devices could process. "I am First Officer Danny Cole of the Terran vessel Valkyrie. We received your distress call and have come to help." Velth forced himself to step forward. He was the one who had sent the message, and he would not hide now. Up close, the human was even more imposing. Danny stood nearly a full head taller than him, and his skin had a healthy pink tone that came from blood rich with oxygen. His hair was cut short in a military style, and his eyes were a startling blue color. "Ambassador Velth of the Ethrin Confederation. We are grateful for your response, though I admit we are surprised you came at all." Danny's mouth curved in what humans called a smile, though several aliens flinched at the sight of his teeth. "You asked for help. Humans don't ignore that, no matter our history." The council led the human delegation to a conference room. More aliens waited inside, along with holographic displays showing the current state of the war. Danny's team spread out around the room, and the aliens noticed how the humans naturally positioned themselves to watch all entrances. It was predator behavior, instinctive and unsettling. A Clixon military commander named Zerthal began the briefing. The Krythak swarm controlled 17 systems and was advancing on multiple fronts. Their ships were organic, grown rather than built, and they could adapt to most weapon types within days. Their ground forces were even worse. The creatures could survive in vacuum, extreme heat, and toxic environments. They felt no fear and took no prisoners. Danny listened carefully, his face showing no emotion. When Zerthal finished, Danny asked technical questions that surprised the aliens. How fast could the swarm adapt? What was their reproduction rate? Did they have any centralized command structure? The humans were already thinking tactically, looking for weaknesses. Then Lieutenant Karen Ross, the human engineer, asked if she could examine the station's defensive systems. The council engineers led her to the power core, explaining that it had been damaged in a recent swarm probe attack. Karen studied the problem for only a few minutes before she pulled off her jacket and reached into the machinery with her bare hands. The alien engineers shouted in alarm. The conduits she was touching carried enough power to kill most species instantly, but Karen simply gritted her teeth against the pain and yanked out the damaged components. Her hands moved quickly, rewiring circuits and replacing burned-out connections. The radiation detector on the wall was screaming warnings, but she ignored it. When she finished, the power core hummed back to full capacity. Karen pulled her hands out, and the aliens could see the burns on her skin already starting to heal. She noticed their horrified stares and shrugged. Humans are pretty resistant to electricity and radiation. Our planet has a lot of both. Back in the conference room, the council was learning more disturbing facts about humanity. When Velth mentioned that the swarm's homeworld was located in a system with twice normal gravity, Danny said that would not be a problem. Earth's gravity was already at that level. Humans trained in it every day. When another representative worried about the toxic atmosphere on several contested worlds, the human medical officer explained that humans could tolerate a wide range of atmospheric conditions. Their bodies were designed to adapt quickly to hostile environments. Commander Jack Hayes arrived from the Valkyrie to meet with Admiral Morgan via holographic communication. The full council assembly watched as the two humans discussed strategy. They spoke with a casual confidence that the aliens found both reassuring and frightening. These were people who had faced extinction and survived. They did not panic in the face of overwhelming odds. Jack's plan was simple and insane by council standards. The human fleet would engage the swarm directly in close-range combat. They would use kinetic weapons, explosives, and tactics that the sophisticated council military had abandoned centuries ago. They would board enemy ships and fight hand-to-hand if necessary. They would sacrifice their vessels to protect council worlds. You cannot be serious, Velth said weakly. Your ships will be destroyed. Your people will die. Jack's expression was hard. Yes, many of us will die. That's what happens in war. But we'll make sure the swarm pays for every human life with 1,000 of their own. That's what you called us here to do, isn't it? The council representatives looked at each other with growing unease. They had called for help from the Deathworlders, and the Deathworlders had answered. But now they were beginning to understand what that truly meant. Humans did not fight like civilized species. They fought like the apex predators they were, with a brutal efficiency that made the swarm look almost merciful by comparison. As the meeting ended, Velth approached Captain Amy Fletcher, who had been quietly observing. She was smaller than the other humans with red hair and green eyes, but she carried herself with the same confident grace. Are all humans like this? Velth asked softly. So willing to fight and die? Amy looked at him with something like sadness in her eyes. We're not monsters, Ambassador. We're just people who learned to survive on a world that tried to kill us every single day. We know what it takes to stay alive when everything wants you dead. And we know what it means to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. Your people looked at Earth and saw a nightmare. We look at it and see home. The human fleet began moving into position around Council space. On dozens of ships, crews prepared for the coming battle. They checked weapons, reviewed tactical plans, and said quiet goodbyes to loved ones back on Earth. They knew many of them would not return. But they had answered the call for help, and humans kept their promises no matter the cost. The swarm was coming, and for the first time in months, the Galactic Council felt something other than despair. They felt hope, carried on the backs of monsters from a death world. The alarm screaming through Karath Prime's defense network told a story of approaching doom. The Krythak swarm had arrived in force, their bioships dropping from faster-than-light travel like a plague of locusts descending on a harvest. The planet's orbital stations opened fire immediately, but their energy weapons barely slowed the enemy advance. The swarm had adapted to Council weapons months ago. On the surface, millions of civilians rushed toward evacuation centers. The Nereid population of Kareth Prime had built their cities near vast oceans, their architecture flowing and beautiful like coral reefs. Now those same cities became death traps as swarm drop pods began falling from the sky, each one carrying hundreds of the chitinous horrors. The planet's defense force fought bravely but uselessly. Their weapons were designed for precise strikes against specific targets. The swarm had no such weaknesses. They came in endless waves, their hard shells deflecting energy blasts, their multiple legs carrying them forward over the bodies of their own dead. Commander Jack Hayes watched the battle unfold from the Valkyrie's bridge. The tactical display showed red markers spreading across Kareth Prime like a disease. Council ships were falling back, trying to maintain formations that were already collapsing. In another hour, maybe less, the planet would be lost. All ships, prepare for combat insertion, Jack ordered. His voice was calm, but every human on the bridge could hear the steel underneath. We're going in. The human fleet broke into attack formation and accelerated toward the planet. The council ships scattered in confusion. This was not proper tactical doctrine. You did not fly directly into an enemy swarm. You maintained distance, used long-range weapons, preserved your forces for strategic withdrawal. But humans fought differently. Admiral Linda Morgan commanded the fleet from her flagship, directing ships with the precision of a surgeon and the aggression of a wolf. When a council cruiser lost power and began drifting into swarm forces, she ordered 3 human destroyers to form a protective screen. The destroyers absorbed massive damage, their armor buckling under bioweapon impacts, but they held position until the cruiser could retreat. On Kareth Prime's surface, Sergeant Paul Griffin led his drop team through the atmosphere in armored pods. The ride down was violent enough to kill most species, but humans trained for high-gravity insertions regularly. When Paul's pod hit the ground and the door blew open, he came out running with his rifle ready. The street ahead was filled with swarm creatures. They looked like nightmare fusion of spiders and crabs, each one the size of a human, but armed with cutting claws and acid sacs. They turned toward Paul's team with insect precision, and then they charged. Paul opened fire. His rifle used kinetic rounds, simple bullets accelerated to high velocity. They were primitive by galactic standards, but they punched through swarm chitin with satisfying efficiency. Around him, his team spread out and began laying down covering fire. Defensive positions around the evacuation center, Paul shouted. Hold this line no matter what. The battle became a grinding fight for every meter of ground. The swarm kept coming in waves that never seemed to end. Paul's team fell back to prepared positions using buildings and barricades for cover. When one Marine ran out of ammunition, he switched to his sidearm. When that was empty, he drew a combat knife and prepared to fight hand to hand. Corporal Lisa Martin found herself alone when her position was overrun. A swarm creature had knocked her rifle away and 3 more were closing in. She drew her knife, feeling the familiar weight of the blade in her hand. The creatures attacked together and Lisa moved on pure instinct. She dodged the first attack, drove her knife into the creature's brain cluster and ripped it free in one smooth motion. The second creature caught her with a claw across the ribs, a wound that would have disemboweled most species. Lisa grunted in pain but stayed on her feet, bringing the knife up into the creature's underbelly. The third creature lunged for her throat, and she met it with a headbutt that cracked its forward carapace. For 12 minutes, Lisa held that position alone. She killed 17 swarm creatures with nothing but a knife and raw determination. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found her still standing, bleeding from a dozen wounds that should have been fatal, but still ready to fight. In orbit, the space battle reached its peak intensity. Pilot Officer Kevin Shaw flew his fighter through a cloud of swarm biofighters, his weapons blazing. His instruments screamed warnings about a massive enemy ship moving into position. Kevin checked his fuel and ammunition. Both were almost gone. He made a decision that would have horrified any council pilot. He pointed his fighter directly at the bioship and accelerated to maximum speed. The enemy vessel tried to shoot him down, but Kevin's evasive maneuvers were too erratic. At the last second, he ejected from the cockpit as his fighter slammed into the bioship's central mass and detonated. Kevin's parachute deployed, and he floated down toward Kareth Prime's surface. He landed on a rooftop in the middle of a war, Zone released his parachute and picked up a rifle from a fallen council soldier. Without hesitation, he made his way down to street level and started fighting alongside the ground forces. The council observers watching the battle could not believe what they were seeing. Humans did not retreat when wounded. They did not break formation when outnumbered. They treated injuries that would incapacitate other species as minor inconveniences, and they kept fighting with a ferocity that matched the swarm itself. But the swarm's numbers were overwhelming. Despite human courage and council support, the defense was beginning to crumble. Paul's team was down to half strength. Lisa had collapsed from blood loss and had to be dragged to a medical station. Evacuation ships were taking off, but thousands of civilians were still trapped. On the Valkyrie, Jack made a decision that would change the course of the war. He accessed the ship's weapons locker and authorized the deployment of Protocol 7, a biological weapon that humanity had developed but never used. It was designed specifically to target hive mind communication systems, breaking down the neural links that allowed coordinated action. The Council had outlawed such weapons centuries ago. They considered biological warfare to be barbaric and immoral. But Jack had not come here to follow Council laws. He had come to win. Deploy Protocol 7 across all swarm concentrations, he ordered. Full saturation. Human ships launched canisters into the atmosphere. They burst over swarm formations, releasing invisible agents that seeped into the creature's sensory organs. The effect was not immediate, but within minutes, the coordinated attacks began to falter. Swarm creatures started moving independently, attacking each other in confusion. The hive mind was fracturing. Paul saw the change immediately. The creatures that had been attacking in perfect coordination suddenly became disorganized. They wandered aimlessly or fought among themselves. His team pressed the advantage, pushing forward and clearing streets that had been impassable minutes before. In orbit, the swarm bioships lost their formation and began drifting. Human and council forces tore into them with renewed fury. Within an hour, the remaining swarm forces were retreating, their hive mind so disrupted they could barely function. Karath Prime was saved, but the cost was written in human blood. 30% of the human ground forces were casualties. 5 ships were destroyed, and dozens more were heavily damaged. The council medics were overwhelmed by the human wounded, shocked by injuries that would have killed their own people instantly. But the humans considered it a victory. They had saved billions of lives and proved that the swarm could be beaten. As the evacuation ships lifted off with the last civilians, Paul stood among the ruins and looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, the war continued. But today, humanity had shown the galaxy what Deathworlders could do when they fought for something worth protecting. Ambassador Velth watched the aftermath from orbit and felt a mixture of gratitude and terror. The humans had saved them, yes. But they had done it with methods that violated every civilized law. They had unleashed biological weapons, fought with suicidal bravery, and treated casualties that would end careers as minor setbacks. The question now was whether the cure was worse than the disease. Humanity had answered the call for help, but what would happen when the swarm was finally defeated and these dangerous, powerful Deathworlders were no longer needed? That question kept Velth awake as the station medics worked through the night, trying to save human soldiers who refused to stay down even with wounds that defied medical science. The council chamber had become a place of division and fear. Representatives from across the galaxy argued with raised voices and agitated gestures. The debate had been going for hours and no consensus had emerged. The question before them was simple but terrifying. Should they continue accepting human help, or had they invited something worse than the swarm into their space? The Clixon representative stood on his speaking platform, his insect-like body trembling with emotion. They use biological weapons. Weapons we banned for good reason. Who is to say they will not turn those weapons against us when the swarm is defeated? A Nerid counselor responded with her own concerns. My people saw what they did on Karath Prime. They fight like animals with no regard for their own survival. How can we trust beings who value violence so highly? Ambassador Velth listened to the arguments and felt exhaustion settling into his bones. He had not slept properly since the humans arrived. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw human soldiers charging into certain death, with expressions of grim determination. He saw Lisa Martin standing in a pool of her own blood, still fighting. He saw Kevin Shaw parachuting into a war zone and immediately picking up a weapon to continue fighting. The humans terrified him, but they had also saved billions of lives. Velth stood and requested permission to speak. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew he was the one who had contacted humanity in the first place. Many blamed him for the current situation. "We called for help," Velth said quietly. "We were dying and no one else could save us." The humans answered that call. They did not demand payment. They did not ask for territory or resources. They simply came and fought alongside us. Yes, their methods frighten us. Yes, they break our laws and challenge our understanding of civilized behavior. But they are winning. For the first time in months, we are winning, a vote was called. After hours of debate, the council made their decision. They would continue the partnership with humanity. But secretly, many representatives began making plans for what to do when the war ended and the dangerous deathworlders were no longer needed. Captain Amy Fletcher arrived at the council's diplomatic station to negotiate terms. She had been expecting the meeting and she came prepared. Amy was good at reading people, and she could see the fear and suspicion in the aliens' eyes. They wanted human military power but were terrified of human nature. She sat across from a committee of council representatives and laid out humanity's terms. They were not negotiable. In exchange for fighting the swarm, Earth demanded full membership in the Galactic Council. The quarantine would end immediately. Humans would have access to all council space and technology. All restrictions would be lifted. The council representatives tried to negotiate, but Amy remained firm. "You need us more than we need you," she said bluntly. Earth survived 300 years of isolation. We built our own civilization, our own technology, our own fleet. We can return to the quarantine zone and leave you to fight the swarm alone. Or you can accept our terms and gain allies who will never abandon you in your darkest hour. The council had no choice. They agreed. As the war continued, human influence began spreading through council forces. Engineer Karen Ross set up workshops where she taught alien technicians human engineering principles. The aliens were amazed by humanity's approach to technology. Where council science emphasized elegance and efficiency, human engineering focused on durability and simplicity. Human tools could be repaired with basic materials. Human weapons worked in extreme conditions. Human ships could take damage that would destroy council vessels and keep fighting. Dr. Helen Price arrived from Earth with a research team. She was a xenobiologist who specialized in hostile life forms. The council gave her access to captured swarm specimens, and she began studying them with an intensity that made the alien scientists uncomfortable. Helen worked 18-hour days, sleeping in her laboratory and eating meals while examining tissue samples. After 2 weeks, she made a breakthrough. The swarm's reproduction cycle depended on specific chemical triggers that could be disrupted. If they could introduce the right compounds into a hive environment, they could sterilize an entire swarm population. It would not kill them immediately, but within months that hive would die out from inability to reproduce. The council scientists were impressed but also disturbed. Helen had discovered the weakness by experimenting on live specimens in ways that violated numerous ethical guidelines. When questioned, she simply shrugged. "We're at war. Ethics are a luxury we can't afford right now." Lieutenant Ben Carter was assigned to lead a covert mission deep into swarm territory. His objective was to locate the central hive world, the source from which all swarm forces originated. It was a suicide mission by any reasonable standard, but Ben volunteered without hesitation. His team included 6 humans and 4 aliens who had proven themselves in combat. The aliens were volunteers, species who had lost their homeworlds to the swarm and wanted revenge. They had learned to fight alongside humans and adopted some of their brutal efficiency. The mission took them through 3 swarm-controlled systems. They traveled in a captured bioship, modified to mask their presence. When they encountered swarm patrols, they hid in the ship's organic cavities, breathing through filters and remaining motionless for hours. The aliens were amazed by the humans' ability to endure discomfort. Ben and his people could go days without proper sleep, eating protein bars and recycled water, maintaining combat readiness through sheer willpower. They found the hive world in a system so hostile that no council ship had ever mapped it. The planet was massive, with crushing gravity and an atmosphere of toxic gases. Swarm creatures covered the surface in numbers that defied calculation, but Ben's team accomplished their mission. They planted tracking beacons and gathered intelligence on the hive's defenses before escaping back to Council space. Only half the team returned. 2 humans died when their position was discovered, buying time for the others to escape. 1 alien was infected by a swarm parasite and had to be left behind. The survivors carried the weight of those losses like physical burdens. The aliens who returned with Ben were changed. They had learned something about humans that no amount of explanation could have taught them. Humans mourned their dead, but they did not let grief stop them from continuing the mission. They honored sacrifice by refusing to let it be in vain. But the war was taking its toll on the humans as well. Counselor Marie Davis arrived from Earth to work with human soldiers who were showing signs of psychological trauma. The Council learned that despite their physical toughness, humans were emotionally vulnerable. They had nightmares about the battles they fought. They grieved for friends lost in combat. Some struggled with the violence they had witnessed and participated in. Marie worked tirelessly to help soldiers process their experiences. She also spent time educating alien allies about human psychology. "We're not fearless," she explained to a group of council officers. "We feel fear just like you do. The difference is that we've learned to act despite our fear. That's what courage is, not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep fighting even when you're terrified." This revelation changed how many aliens viewed humanity. They began to understand that humans were not monsters who enjoyed violence. They were people who had been shaped by a harsh world, who had learned to survive through determination and sacrifice. They fought not because they were cruel, but because they understood what was at stake. Admiral Linda Morgan reviewed casualty reports in her quarters and felt the weight of command pressing down on her. Hundreds of humans had died since arriving in Council space. Thousands more were wounded. Every name on those reports represented someone's child, parent, or friend. Someone who had volunteered to help people who had once called them monsters. But the war was turning in their favor. The swarm was being pushed back system by system. The combined human council forces had learned to fight together, combining council precision with human ferocity. And now they had a target: the hive world, the source of the plague. If they could destroy that, they could end the war. But it would require everything they had. Every ship, every soldier, every ounce of courage they could muster. The final battle was coming, and everyone knew that many would not survive to see the victory. On the Valkyrie, Commander Jack Hayes prepared his crew for what was ahead. He walked through the ship, speaking with his people, making sure they understood what they were fighting for. Not glory or revenge, but for the chance to protect innocent lives. For the opportunity to prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars. The fleet began gathering for the final assault. Human ships and council vessels formed up together, their crews united by a common purpose. The swarm had to be stopped, and they were the only ones who could do it. The price of partnership had been high, paid in blood and sacrifice. But now came the time to see if that price would purchase victory or merely postpone defeat. The void expanse earned its name honestly. It was a region of space where stars were rare and darkness ruled. Navigation was treacherous, and the gravitational anomalies made faster than light travel dangerous. It was the perfect place for the swarm to hide their homeworld, and it would be the perfect place for the galaxy's defenders to die. The combined fleet gathered at the edge of the expanse. Hundreds of ships hung in space, human vessels alongside council cruisers and frigates. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Admiral Linda Morgan commanded from her flagship, with Ambassador Velth and other council leaders present to witness the final battle. Commander Jack Hayes stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, studying the tactical displays. The intelligence from Ben Carter's mission showed the hive world's defenses in detail. Thousands of bioships, millions of swarm creatures on the surface, orbital platforms that could tear apart conventional fleets. The numbers were overwhelming, but Jack had learned long ago that numbers were not everything. "All ships report ready," his communication officer announced. Jack activated the fleet-wide channel. His voice carried to every ship, every crew member, human and alien alike. "We're about to enter the void and face the greatest threat this galaxy has ever known. Many of us won't make it back, but if we succeed today, we'll save billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. We'll prove that courage and determination can overcome even the darkest evil. Humanity came to help when we were needed. Today, we finish what we started. All ships engaged drives. The fleet entered the void together. The journey took hours, navigating through the treacherous space. Sensors constantly recalculated courses to avoid gravitational wells. Ships stayed in tight formation, ready to protect each other if they encountered swarm patrols. When they emerged near the hive world, the sight took everyone's breath away. The planet was a nightmare given form. Its surface writhed with movement, millions of swarm creatures visible even from orbit. The bioships surrounding it looked like a swarm of insects defending their nest, and the orbital platforms hung in space like enormous predators waiting to strike. The swarm detected them immediately. The bioships began moving into attack formation, and the planetary defenses powered up. The battle began with a fury that exceeded anything that had come before. Admiral Morgan directed the fleet with calm precision. Human destroyers formed the front line, their heavy armor absorbing the initial attacks. Council ships stayed behind them, using their energy weapons to pick off targets. The formation held despite massive casualties. Captain Danny Cole commanded a destroyer that took the first impacts from the orbital platforms. His ship's armor buckled and systems failed, but he kept his vessel in position. When the platform fired again, Danny ordered his ship to intercept the blast meant for a council cruiser. The destroyer absorbed the hit that would have destroyed the larger vessel, and Danny's crew began emergency evacuations even as they continued fighting. Danny evacuated his crew into escape pods, but he remained on the bridge until the last person was off. When his ship finally broke apart, he was in an escape pod coordinating defensive formations via emergency communications. His ship was gone, but his crew survived, and the council cruiser they had protected continued fighting. On the planet's surface, the ground assault was already underway. Sergeant Paul Griffin led the first wave of drop troops through the toxic atmosphere. The gravity was crushing and the heat was extreme, but human soldiers pushed through conditions that would have killed most species instantly. They hit the ground fighting, their weapons blazing as they carved out landing zones for the follow-up forces. Lieutenant Lisa Martin fought alongside Paul, her previous wounds fully healed. She had volunteered for the ground assault despite doctors recommending more rest. But humans did not sit out the final battle. They led from the front, and Lisa would not let her team face this without her. The swarm fought with desperate ferocity. They knew this was their last stand. Creatures poured from underground tunnels in numbers that seemed endless. But the combined forces pushed forward meter by meter, fighting toward the massive structure at the planet's center. That was where the Queen Mind lived, the central intelligence that coordinated the entire swarm. Dr. Helen Price traveled with the assault force, protected by a squad of human Marines. She carried the biological weapon that would sterilize the Queen Mind and end the swarm's ability to reproduce. But they had to get close enough to deploy it, and the swarm would fight to the death to prevent that. In orbit, the space battle reached its peak intensity. Human ships absorbed punishment that should have destroyed them, but they kept fighting. When a Council flagship lost power, 3 human cruisers formed a protective wall around it, their armor taking hits meant for the disabled vessel. The crews knew they were sacrificing themselves, but they did not hesitate. Pilot Officer Kevin Shaw led a squadron of fighters through the chaos, targeting the orbital platforms. His weapons took out power conduits and weapon arrays, creating openings for larger ships to exploit. When his fighter was hit and began losing power, Kevin rode the crippled craft down toward the planet's surface, using its last moments to ram into a concentration of swarm bioships. He ejected before impact and landed hard on the planet's surface. His suit was damaged and he was far from the main assault force. But Kevin picked himself up, checked his weapon, and began moving toward the sounds of battle. Humans did not quit, even when alone and injured in the heart of enemy territory. The ground forces fought through organic tunnels that pulsed with disgusting life. The swarm threw everything at them, but the combined forces pressed forward. Paul and Lisa led their teams through killing zones that should have stopped any advance. They lost soldiers with every step, but they did not stop. Finally, they reached the chamber where the Queen Mind waited. It was enormous, a creature that had grown into the planet itself, its neural network stretching for kilometers in all directions. It was beautiful in a horrifying way, and it was aware of their presence. The Queen Mind unleashed a psychic scream that brought most species to their knees. The alien soldiers collapsed, clutching their heads in agony. But the humans were barely affected. They lacked strong psychic sensitivity, one of the few advantages of coming from a world without any psychic species. Dr. Helen Price moved forward while the Marines laid down covering fire. She reached the Queen Mind's central mass and deployed the biological weapon directly into its neural tissue. The effect was not immediate, but within minutes the Queen Mind began to convulse. Its control over the swarm started fracturing. In orbit, the bioship suddenly lost coordination. They began drifting or attacking each other. The orbital platforms went silent as the intelligence controlling them died. The human and council forces pressed their advantage, destroying the confused enemy vessels. On the surface, swarm creatures stopped their organized attacks and began wandering aimlessly. Some collapsed and died immediately. Others fought among themselves. The hive mind was dead, and with it went the swarm's ability to function as a unified force. The battle was over. The swarm was defeated, but the cost was written in the thousands of names on the casualty lists. Hundreds of human ships were destroyed or heavily damaged. Thousands of soldiers would never see Earth again. The aliens had suffered losses too, but they understood that humanity had paid the highest price. As the surviving forces regrouped, Admiral Morgan addressed the fleet one final time. Her voice was tired but filled with pride. "We did what we came here to do. The swarm is finished. The galaxy is safe. Those we lost today died as heroes, protecting people they barely knew. Let their sacrifice remind us all of what we can accomplish when we stand together." Ambassador Velth stood in the council chamber weeks later as the formal vote was taken. The debate was brief this time. Humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Council. The quarantine was officially ended. All restrictions were lifted. But more than that, something fundamental had changed in how the galaxy viewed humanity. They were no longer monsters from a forbidden world. They were protectors who had answered the call when no one else could. They were people who understood sacrifice and courage in ways that peaceful civilizations had forgotten. Commander Jack Hayes, promoted to admiral after the battle, addressed the council in person. He stood before representatives from across the galaxy and spoke with simple honesty. "We didn't come here for glory or recognition. We came because you needed help, and we knew what it meant to face extinction. We're not perfect. We're violent, stubborn, and we make mistakes, but we never give up on those who need us. That's what it means to be human." The fleet returned to Earth as heroes. Parades were held in every major city. Monuments were erected to honor the fallen, but the veterans who survived carried scars that would never fully heal. They had seen the worst the galaxy could offer, and they had stared into that darkness without blinking. Lisa Martin stood at the memorial wall in Earth's capital, looking at the names carved into black stone. So many names, so many people who would never come home. She reached out and touched one name in particular, a friend who had died on Karath Prime. Tears ran down her face, but she did not look away.